Strike Suit Zero by Born Ready Games is another child of the Kickstarter parentage. Funded a cool $74,000 over their $100,000 goal on November 17th, the game launched January 23rd on both Steam and Good Old Games. I eagerly backed the game for its premise of larger space battles, eye-pleasing graphics, and the fantastic idea of having a spaceship transform into a mech on the fly, because I have an unhealthy attachment to mechs and transforming robots. So now that I've finally beaten it, how does it rate? First, let's look at the positives. For most games, space combat especially, controls can make or break the game. I'm happy to say that Strike Suit Zero does piloting controls right, and after a short learning curve anyone can fly with the best of the computer. By the end of the game, I had gone from frequent deaths for failing to dodge, to maneuvering around the battlefield with hardly a scratch on me. The game has control schemes available for keyboard and mouse, gamepad, and joystick. Lacking a joystick, I opted for the keyboard and mouse. I did run the intro mission on the gamepad just to see the difference, and as expected with the default setup it basically equates to the standard difference between keyboard and mouse versus gamepad, with the PC standard option just that much more precise. I have no problem with the gamepad, so it's definitely up to personal preference. The steering is very smooth and responsive, which becomes incredibly important since 80% of the battles depend on you making instantaneous turns and flips, and thanks to the brakes that's never an issue. The game features a targeting computer in the sense that depending on your weapon, you only need to be so far from your target in order to hit them. This doesn't diminish the difficulty, however, as the battles are fast enough that precision aiming would be nearly impossible. Certain weapons don't use the computer, so if you want the challenge, feel free to use those. The graphics aren't Ultra HD Crisis realism, but instead have a semi-realistic art style that is very clean and smooth and nice on the eyes. The lighting, however, exists as a double-edged sword in this way. While light streaks are pretty and endearing, there's this weird curve effect on the screen when lights pass by. Normally this isn't an issue, but in a stage late into the game, it does become a bit much. Likewise, the sound is a mix between space action ambience and space opera vocals. Both are quite fitting to the setting, but playing through I only acknowledged perhaps 4 different songs. It's not a huge bother, but as you were grinding away through the later stages, it made me want to put on something a little different and more exciting. This song from Shadow of the Colossus is much more fitting. Aside from the mediocre music, the whole game is actually voice acted, and it sounds pretty great.
Something's wrong. The coordinates check out, but where's the fleet?
We're looking at it. What's left of it. My God. What the hell happened here?
With that, let's move on to the less than great aspects of the game. To start that off, let's look at the story. In a not quite fully animated intro sequence, we learn the history of humanity's future on Earth.
A war fought over those vast distances is expensive. Neither side could maintain...
Some alien signal prompts space colonization, the colonies rebel with some ancient artifact is discovered, and then war. It's nothing amazing or new, but it gets the job done. My main gripe is how it plays into the actual plot. After the first couple of stages, you learn that the opposing faction has a weapon capable of destroying planets and is heading towards Earth. However, your commanding officer in all of his genius decides that isn't important, and instead has you waste half the game taking out smaller units from the enemy military. It isn't until much later in the game that someone kicks him out of the way and orders you to go engage the actual threat, and even then there's still a couple more missions where you need to destroy things such as relay stations and the like.
Team 1, your assigned target is a series of supply platforms.
Considering the game only has 13 missions, for how forgettable the plot is, you'd think they would have tried to make it more interesting. My next gripe is what may turn most people off to the game, and that is, sadly, the gameplay. Now, as previously mentioned, the controls themselves are very well done and responsive. What the game has you doing is not the most fun those controls could give you. At least 90% of the game follows this pattern. Fly towards an enemy, lock onto the enemy, circle around the enemy while firing at it, repeat once dead. That's it. Different weapons change how you shoot at them, and using the strike mode allows you to unleash a hellstorm of missiles that do a significantly larger amount of damage. But regardless of whether you are taking on small interceptors or removing the turrets from a cruiser, the game boils down to orbiting a target and occasionally firing at it whenever you aren't recharging your shields. On a similar note, expect to be doing this a lot because your allied AI doesn't seem to exist as anything more than a distraction for the smaller ships. Except for the occasional mission where you have bombers or torpedoes on your side, nearly all of the enemies and objectives fall to you to accomplish, which also means aside from the random interceptor, nearly the entire battlefield is focused on you or the ship you're trying to defend.
Copy that. Adams, the frigate's in a bad way. We need to move fast.
The only time your AI is any good is a very easy stage where you simply destroy the occasional incoming missile targeting your fleet. There, your allies manage to snipe all of them regardless of visibility or distance. This would be fine, except it leaves you with nothing to do, and makes it impossible to complete the challenge where you need to destroy all of them yourself. Another problem with the gameplay is the ammo count. Now, your primary plasma turret has infinite ammo and only needs to recharge, but everything else is very, very limited. So much so that you can expend all of your missiles within the first 2 minutes of a 15-minute mission, and that's without wasting any of them. Without missiles, battles become very grindy as you build up energy for the strike mode, which fortunately has recharging missiles. This would be less of an issue if you can return to your primary ship and reload. There's only one mission with that option, and even those moments are scripted and the mission itself is a half-hour long. My final gripe is that for how well the controls work throughout the first 12 missions, the final mission absolutely screws over everything you've learned. In all preceding missions, you have massive, mostly empty battlefields to fly around in without any worries. However, the last mission puts you in a narrow series of tubes that move, making you struggle to stay in the middle while the stage forces you to accelerate due to both a gravity effect and a timer that will force you to restart the 15-minute stage if it runs out. My first time through, I assumed there would be sufficient time and used the brakes to better navigate the nearly 90-degree turns, and ran out of time still minutes before the end. When I finally did succeed, I finished with maybe 40 seconds left, and that was after boosting through half the stage. So, where does Strike Suit Zero stand? As a Kickstarter game, it definitely isn't a tropes versus women failure. Far from it, actually. The developers put some real effort into creating a very playable and occasionally enjoyable game. The main problem seemed to come from them creating a great control setup with no idea how to implement it. If a sequel or expansion ever comes out, there's a lot of hope for improvement because it isn't a bad game. Born Ready is regularly updating on Kickstarter with announcements for extra campaigns and the like, but for now, I'd recommend waiting for a Steam sale to try it out. Who knows, by then the community will have had it long enough, and since mod tools are on the way, perhaps some fan stages will turn this otherwise moderately enjoyable space romp into the action game it could have been.